The dust hadn't even settled from the stagecoach wheels when Eliza felt the eyes on her. Not curious eyes, judging ones. She stepped down onto the wooden planks of Iron Hollow's main street, her traveling coat wrinkled and her hat slightly crooked from the 12-hour journey. The afternoon sun was unforgiving, bleaching everything to shades of brown and gray. The buildings, the dirt, even the people seemed sun-faded. A frontier town clinging to the edge of something bigger, always waiting for prosperity that never quite arrived. Eliza adjusted the strap of her carpet bag and scanned the street. The hotel was supposed to be on the left, next to the general store. She'd rented a room sight unseen, paying 2 months in advance from savings she could barely afford to part with. But she'd needed to leave. Needed distance, needed a place where nobody knew her name or her story. Iron Hollow had seemed perfect for that. She made it exactly 14 steps before the first woman approached. "You must be the new seamstress." The voice came from behind, pleasant enough on the surface, but with an edge underneath. Eliza turned to find a woman in her 40s, well-dressed by frontier standards, her dark hair pulled into a severe bun. She had the look of someone who ran things, or at least thought she did. "I am," Eliza said, keeping her voice neutral. "Eliza Hart, Margaret Pruitt." The woman didn't offer her hand. "My husband owns the lumber mill. I also head the ladies' social committee." She said it like a title that demanded recognition. "We're pleased to have someone with your skills. The last seamstress left rather suddenly." "Did she?" "Married a prospector. Moved to Nevada." Margaret's smile was thin. "We have standards here, Miss Hart. Iron Hollow may be small, but we're respectable people. We look after our own." Eliza had heard speeches like this before. They always meant the same thing: conform, or else. "I appreciate that, Mrs. Pruitt." "Good." Margaret gestured toward the hotel. "You'll want to get settled. I'll call on you tomorrow. There are things you should know about the town, people you should meet." Her eyes flicked up and down Eliza's frame, taking inventory. "And people you should avoid." There it was. Less than 5 minutes in town, and the walls were already going up. "I'm sure I'll figure it out," Eliza said lightly. Margaret's expression tightened just slightly. "Some things are better learned from those who know, but suit yourself." She turned and walked away, her skirt swishing with the kind of authority that suggested she wasn't used to being dismissed. Eliza watched her go, then headed toward the hotel. The room was small but clean, which was all she'd hoped for. A narrow bed, a washstand, a single chair by the window overlooking the street. She set down her bags and sat heavily on the mattress, feeling the exhaustion of travel catch up with her all at once. She'd made it. New town, new start. The thought should have brought relief, but instead she just felt tired. The next morning, Eliza opened her seamstress shop in a rented space on the ground floor of the hotel. It wasn't much, just a front room sheeted with good light and enough space for a work table, but it was hers. She'd hung a simple sign in the window: E. Hart, Dressmaking and Alterations. By noon, she'd had 3 visitors, all women, all with the same agenda. The first was a young mother named Caroline who needed a dress taken in. She was sweet, nervous, and spent most of the fitting talking about her children. It wasn't until she was leaving that she paused at the door. "Miss Hart, may I offer some advice?" Eliza looked up from her notes. "Of course." Caroline glanced out at the street, then lowered her voice. "There's a man in town, Caleb Boone. He works out at the Whitmore Ranch, manages the foreman's crew." She hesitated. Well, people talk. If he comes around, it's better not to engage, for your reputation." "What did he do?" "It's not what he did exactly. It's—" Caroline's cheeks flushed. "It's personal. Female trouble. A woman who used to live here, she said things about him. Terrible things. About his adequacy." She could barely get the word out. "As a man." Eliza blinked. "I'm sorry?" "He's been ruined, Miss Hart. No decent woman would go near him after what was said. I just thought you should know, in case he tries to speak to you." After Caroline left, Eliza stood in the middle of her shop, genuinely baffled. She'd expected warnings about drunks, gamblers, maybe men with violent tendencies. But this? A man was being ostracized because of bedroom gossip? The second visitor was Mrs. Pruitt herself, under the pretense of commissioning a new dress. She barely looked at fabric samples before launching into what was clearly the real purpose of her visit. You met Caroline this morning, I assume? I did. Then she told you about Caleb Boone. Eliza threaded a needle, not looking up. She mentioned him. What happened to that man was unfortunate, but it was his own doing. He courted the wrong woman, and she had every right to speak her mind about her experiences. Margaret's voice was firm. A woman's testimony should be believed, Miss Hart, especially in matters of intimate disappointment. Eliza tied off the thread. And this woman who made the claim, is she still in town? She moved back east. Family matter. Convenient. Margaret's eyes narrowed. Are you suggesting she lied? I'm suggesting I don't know her or him, so I have no opinion. Eliza met her gaze. I'm here to sew, Mrs. Pruitt, not to get involved in other people's business. Everything is everyone's business in a town this size. You'd do well to remember that. After Margaret left, Eliza locked the door and sat in the silence of her shop. She'd come here to escape judgment, and instead she'd walk straight into a different kind of trap. A town that had already decided who was worthy and who wasn't, and expected her to fall in line. The third visitor came just before closing. An older woman named Ruth who ran the boarding house and had a kind, weathered face. She needed mending on some linens and didn't mention Caleb Boone at all, which was such a relief that Eliza almost thanked her for it. But as Ruth was paying, she paused. You've probably heard about Caleb. Eliza sighed. I have. Thought so. Margaret's efficient. Ruth counted out coins. I'll just say this. I've known that boy since he was 16. He's a hard worker, keeps to himself, never caused trouble. What happened to him was cruel. Whether the girl was truthful or not, the way this town treated him after was wrong. Why didn't anyone stand up for him? Some did. Quietly. But you can't fight gossip with facts, Miss Hart. Gossip doesn't need proof. It just needs repetition. Ruth picked up her mended linens. I'm not telling you what to think, just that there's more to every story than what gets repeated at tea parties. After Ruth left, Eliza closed up shop and walked back upstairs to her room. She stood at the window looking out at the darkening street and felt something she hadn't expected. Anger. She'd spent the last 3 years of her life being whispered about, being reduced to a scandal she didn't create, being judged by people who didn't know the truth and didn't care to learn it. She'd run from that, hoping to find somewhere she could just exist without the weight of other people's assumptions. And here was this town, doing the exact same thing to someone else. A man she'd never met, never seen, whose only crime seemed to be trusting the wrong person. Eliza made a decision then, standing at that window. She would meet Caleb Boone, not to prove anything to anyone else, but because she refused, absolutely refused, to let someone else's fear dictate her choices ever again. The Whitmore Ranch sat 5 miles outside of town, accessible by a dirt road that cut through open prairie. Eliza rented a horse from the livery the next morning, ignoring the stable boy's curious look when she asked for directions. The ride gave her time to think and doubt. What was she doing, really? Riding out to confront a stranger based on principle? She didn't even know if Caleb Boone would want to speak to her. For all she knew, he'd learned to avoid townspeople entirely. But she kept riding. The ranch appeared gradually, first the fence lines, then the grazing cattle, then the main house and outbuildings. It was a working ranch, not fancy but well-maintained. Men moved between the barns and corrals, tending to the daily labor that kept a place like this running. Eliza dismounted near the main house and was immediately approached by a man in his 50s, bow-legged and sunbeaten. "Help you, miss?" "I'm looking for Caleb Boone." The man's expression shifted, not hostile, but cautious. "What for?" "I'd like to speak with him. Personal matter." He studied her for a long moment, then pointed toward a large barn. "He's checking inventory. Through there." Eliza walked across the yard, acutely aware of the attention she was drawing. Ranch hands paused in their work, watching. Word would get back to town. She'd be added to the gossip mill herself. She didn't care. The barn was dim and cool, smelling of hay and leather. It took her eyes a moment to adjust. When they did, she saw him. Caleb Boone stood near the back wall, checking items against a list. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the kind of build that came from years of physical work. His hair was dark, slightly too long, and he moved with a careful economy of motion, like someone used to taking up as little space as possible. He hadn't noticed her yet. "Mr. Boone?" He turned, and Eliza saw his face clearly for the first time. He wasn't handsome in any conventional sense. His features were too rough, his jaw too square, a small scar cutting through his left eyebrow. But his eyes, dark brown, almost black, held something she recognized immediately. Wariness. The kind that came from being hurt too many times. "Who's asking?" His voice was low, carefully neutral. "My name is Eliza Hart. I'm the new seamstress in town." He set down his clipboard, his expression closing off even further. "I don't need sewing done." "I'm not here for that." "Then why are you here?" There was no hostility in the question, just exhaustion, like he'd had this conversation before and knew how it would end. Eliza took a breath. "Because 3 different women warned me about you yesterday, and I wanted to see for myself if any of it was true." For a moment, he just stared at her. Then something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, or confusion. "And what exactly did they tell you? That you're less than a man? That a woman left town because of your shortcomings? That I should avoid you for the sake of my reputation?" His jaw tightened. "So you came out here to satisfy your curiosity, to see the town scandal up close?" "No." Eliza stepped closer. "I came out here because I know what it's like to be judged by people who don't know you. I came because I'm tired of letting gossip decide what's true. And I came because if everyone is this determined to convince me you're terrible, I figure there's probably more to the story." Caleb was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter. "You should go back to town, Miss Hart. Whatever you think you're doing, it's not worth the trouble it'll cause you. That's my decision to make." "Is it?" He turned away, picking up his clipboard again. "You've been here, what, 2 days? You don't know how this town works. You befriend the wrong person, and suddenly your business dries up. Nobody comes to your shop. You get frozen out." He glanced back at her. "You seem like you're trying to build something here. Don't ruin it before you even start." "I'm trying to build something honest," Eliza said, "and I can't do that if I let fear decide who I talk to." He studied her, and she could see him trying to figure out if she was genuine or just naive. Maybe both. "What do you want from me?" he asked finally. "The truth. What actually happened with that woman?" Caleb's expression darkened. "Why would you believe anything I say? You don't know me." "That's true. But I'm asking anyway." He set the clipboard down again, leaning back against the workbench. For a long moment, he just looked at her, weighing something. Then he exhaled slowly. Her name was Rebecca Stowe. She came to town about 3 years ago, worked at the hotel. She was pretty, charming, made a point of talking to me when nobody else would. I thought... He stopped, his jaw working. "I thought she liked me, for me." Eliza waited. "We courted for a few months. Nothing improper. Walks, dinners at the boarding house. Her family back east had money, and she talked about how she wanted something different, someone real." I believed her. His voice was flat now, emotionless. Then one day, she told me her father was coming to visit, wanted to meet me. I bought new clothes, tried to make a good impression. What happened? He took one look at me and laughed, told her she was wasting her time on a ranch hand with no prospects, said she was coming home with him. End of discussion. Caleb's hands gripped the edge of the workbench. She fought him at first, but then she got angry. At me. Like it was my fault her father didn't approve. She started saying things, private things, intimate things that weren't true. Told her father I was deficient, told her friends. Within a week, the whole town knew. And she just left? 2 weeks later. Back east like none of it ever happened. He met Eliza's eyes. I tried to defend myself at first, but how do you fight something like that? It's intimate. Nobody wants to hear a man talk about his own adequacy. And the more I denied it, the guiltier I sounded. So eventually, I just stopped trying. Eliza felt a cold knot of anger forming in her chest. That's vile. Caleb shrugged, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. It's done. I've learned to live with it. Have you? The question hung between them. I work, he said finally. I keep my head down. I don't go into town unless I have to. It's not much of a life, but it's stable, quiet. Lonely, Eliza added. He didn't deny it. She took another step closer. I'm not going to pretend I know you well enough to judge whether you're telling the truth, but I know vicious gossip when I hear it, and I know what it's like to have your life defined by someone else's lie. What happened to you? Eliza hesitated. She hadn't planned on sharing her own story, but something about the careful way he'd opened up made her want to reciprocate. I was engaged. To a man from a good family. Everyone thought it was perfect. She looked down at her hands. 2 weeks before the wedding, he called it off. Told everyone I'd been inappropriate with another man. It wasn't true, but it didn't matter. My reputation was destroyed. I couldn't walk down the street without whispers following me. Why did he lie? Because he'd gotten someone else pregnant and needed an excuse to break the engagement that wouldn't make him look bad. Easier to blame me. She met his eyes. I left everything behind, came here to start over. Caleb was quiet for a moment. Then you know it doesn't matter what the truth is if everyone's already decided otherwise. I do. And I know it's not fair and it's not right, and the people who do it are cowards. Eliza's voice was firm. But I also know I'm not going to let it keep happening. Not to me, and not to anyone else I can help. You can't help me, Miss Hart. Maybe not, but I can refuse to participate in the lie. He looked at her like she was speaking a foreign language. What does that mean? It means if you want to come into town, you should. If you want to attend church or eat at the restaurant or buy supplies without feeling like you have to hide, you should do it. And if people have a problem with it, that's their issue to work through, not yours. You're talking about social suicide. I'm talking about living. Eliza held his gaze. You can't let them take everything from you. They've already taken your reputation. Don't let them take your life too. Caleb stared at her for a long moment, and she could see him struggling with something. Hope, maybe, warring with the learned instinct to protect himself. Why do you care? He asked quietly. Because someone should, and because I'm tired of watching good people suffer while gossips thrive. He shook his head slowly, but there was something different in his expression now. Not quite belief, but not total resignation either. You're either very brave or very foolish, Miss Hart. Probably both, she offered a small smile. Will you at least think about what I said? I'll think about it. It wasn't much, but it was something. Eliza left the barn and rode back to town with her mind churning. She'd expected to find either a villain or a victim, but Caleb Boone was neither. He was just a man trying to survive in a situation he hadn't created, carrying wounds he didn't deserve. And somehow, in the space of one conversation, she'd made herself responsible for something she couldn't quite name yet. Word spread fast. By the time Eliza opened her shop the next morning, half the town knew she'd ridden out to the Whitmore Ranch, and by noon, they knew why. Margaret Pruitt arrived at 2 o'clock, her expression thunderous. Have you lost your mind? Eliza kept pinning fabric, not looking up. Good afternoon, Mrs. Pruitt. Don't good afternoon me. You rode out to see Caleb Boone, alone, after being explicitly warned. Margaret's voice was sharp. What were you thinking? I was thinking I'm a grown woman capable of making my own decisions. And those decisions reflect on all of us. You're new here, Miss Hart. You don't understand how carefully we've built this community's reputation. Eliza set down her pins and turned to face her. Built it on what? Gossip and exclusion? Margaret's face flushed. That man was exposed for what he is. We had every right to protect ourselves and our daughters from what? A man who got his heart broken and his reputation destroyed by a woman who lied? Eliza's voice was steady but firm. I spoke to him. I heard his side. And unless you have actual proof that Rebecca Stowe was telling the truth, you're just repeating slander. Rebecca had no reason to lie, didn't she? Her father disapproved of the match. She needed an excuse that would make her look like the victim instead of someone who caved to family pressure. Eliza crossed her arms. Convenient that she left before anyone could question her story too closely. Margaret sputtered. This is outrageous. You've been here less than a week, and you think you can overturn... I'm not trying to overturn anything. I'm just refusing to participate in cruelty. It's not cruelty to protect vulnerable women. From what? Eliza stepped closer. Be specific, Mrs. Pruitt. What actual harm has Caleb Boone caused? What woman has he mistreated? What law has he broken? Silence. That's what I thought, Eliza said quietly. You don't have anything except one woman's word against his, and you chose to believe her because it was easier than questioning the story. Margaret's voice dropped, cold now. You're making a mistake. This town has ways of dealing with people who don't fit in. Then I suppose we'll see how that works out. After Margaret left, Eliza's hand shook as she tried to return to her work. She'd just made an enemy of the most influential woman in town. Her business could be destroyed before it even got started. But when she thought about Caleb's face, that careful, wounded wariness, she couldn't bring herself to regret it. The rest of the week was tense. Some customers stopped coming. Others came specifically to lecture her. A few, like Ruth, quietly expressed support but warned her to be careful. Eliza kept working, kept her shop open, kept her head up. And on Saturday morning, when she looked out her window and saw Caleb Boone riding into town for the first time in over a year, she felt something shift in her chest. He dismounted in front of the general store, tied his horse, and walked inside like he had every right to be there. People stared, whispered, but he didn't hide. Eliza grabbed her shawl and walked outside, crossing the street to stand near the store. She didn't go in, that would be too obvious, but she wanted him to see that someone was there, someone who wouldn't turn away. When Caleb emerged 10 minutes later carrying supplies, his eyes found hers immediately. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then he gave her the smallest nod, acknowledgement, maybe gratitude, and mounted his horse. As he rode out of town, Eliza turned and saw Margaret Pruitt watching from across the street, her expression unreadable. The battle lines had been drawn, and Eliza had just chosen her side. Over the following weeks, something strange began to happen. Caleb started coming to town more regularly. Not every day, but once or twice a week. Always for legitimate business, supplies, ranch errands, but he stopped slinking in and out like a criminal, and Eliza made a point of acknowledging him every time. A nod, a greeting, small gestures that said you have a right to be here. People noticed. Some were scandalized, others were confused. A few seemed almost relieved, like they'd been waiting for someone to break the spell of enforced judgment. Ruth invited Caleb to have coffee at the boarding house one morning. He hesitated, but accepted. Eliza joined them, and the three sat in the dining room while other patrons whispered and stared. "Let them look," Ruth said calmly, pouring coffee. "They'll get bored eventually." But they didn't get bored. If anything, the attention intensified. The ladies' social committee held an emergency meeting to discuss the problem. Several church members voiced concerns about moral standards. Margaret Pruitt gave a speech about maintaining boundaries. Through it all, Eliza kept her shop open and her head high. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, she and Caleb began to build something that looked like friendship. He'd stop by the shop sometimes, ostensibly to pick up mending for the ranch hands. They'd talk, carefully at first, then more easily. About work, about the weather, about nothing in particular. She learned that he was smarter than people gave him credit for. He read books, real ones, not dime novels, and had opinions about land management and cattle breeding that he never got to share because nobody asked. He learned that she had a sharp sense of humor hidden under her proper exterior, that she missed her sister back east but wouldn't write to her out of pride, that she liked coffee too strong and hated tea. They didn't talk about the rumors. There was an unspoken agreement that the past was off limits. They were building something new, something not defined by what other people thought or said. But the town wouldn't let it rest. One afternoon, a delegation of women arrived at Eliza's shop. 5 of them, led by Margaret, all wearing identical expressions of concern. "We're here as friends, Miss Hart." Eliza set down her sewing. "Of course you are. We're worried about you. Your association with Mr. Boone is causing talk." "There's always talk." "This is different," said Caroline, looking genuinely distressed. "People are starting to question your character. They're saying that you must be, desperate to spend time with a man like that." "A man like what?" Eliza asked calmly. The women exchanged glances. "You know what they say about him," Margaret said finally. "A woman of good breeding wouldn't overlook such deficiencies." Eliza stood up slowly. "Let me be very clear, I don't believe Rebecca Stowe. I think she lied to protect her own reputation at his expense. And even if I did believe her, which I don't, it would be none of my business or yours what happens between consenting adults in private." Gasps all around. "Miss Hart, I'm not finished." Eliza's voice was steel now. "You came here to warn me about my reputation, but what about yours? You've spent 3 years tormenting a man based on gossip. You've made him an outcast, destroyed his social life, and convinced yourselves you were protecting the community. But who did you actually protect? Who benefited from his suffering? Silence. You want to judge me for showing basic human decency to someone you've decided doesn't deserve it? Fine, judge away. But I'm not changing my behavior to make you comfortable. Margaret's face was pale with anger. You're making a grave mistake. So you keep telling me. After they left, Eliza sat in the quiet of her shop and wondered if she was in fact making a mistake. Her business was suffering. Her social standing was non-existent. She'd traded one isolation for another. But when she thought about stopping, about crossing the street when she saw Caleb, about pretending he didn't exist to make peace with the town, something in her chest tightened with refusal. She'd run once. She wouldn't run again. That evening, she was closing up shop when Caleb appeared at her door. He looked troubled. You need to stop, he said without preamble. Stop what? Defending me. Fighting with them. You're destroying yourself for no reason. Eliza crossed her arms. That's my decision. It's a stupid decision. His voice was rough. I'm not worth this, Eliza. I'm not worth losing everything you've built. It was the first time he'd used her first name. Something about it made her heart skip. You don't get to decide your own worth, she said quietly, and neither does this town. Then who does? You do. By how you live, by what you choose. She stepped closer. You've been letting them define you for 3 years, Caleb. Don't let them do it forever. He looked at her with something raw in his eyes. Why are you doing this? Because you deserve better. Because someone needs to stand up. Because... She stopped, suddenly uncertain. Because what? Eliza took a breath. Because when I look at you, I don't see what they say. I see someone who's been hurt and chose to survive anyway. Someone who kept working and kept trying even when everyone turned their backs. And that's not weakness. That's strength. The air between them felt charged somehow, dangerous. Caleb took a step back like he was suddenly aware of how close they were standing. You don't know me well enough to say that. Then let me know you better. The words came out before she could stop them. He stared at her. That's not a good idea. Probably not. People will talk. They already are. Eliza, he stopped, shaking his head. You're not thinking clearly. You're caught up in the fight, in proving them wrong. But I'm not some cause you can champion. I'm just a person trying to get through each day without things getting worse. I know that. Do you? Because this feels like, he gestured helplessly, like you're trying to fix something broken, and I can't be fixed. I don't want to fix you, Eliza said firmly. I just want to know you, as a person, not as a scandal or a victim or anything else. Just you. Caleb was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. What if they're right? About what? About me. About what Rebecca said. He wouldn't meet her eyes. What if I am less than I should be? Eliza's heart cracked. Then it still wouldn't matter to me, because a person's worth isn't measured by one aspect of who they are, and anyone who thinks otherwise is a fool. He finally looked at her, and she could see the war happening behind his eyes, fear and hope tangled together. This is a bad idea, he said again. Most good things are. And there, in the doorway of her shop with the sun setting behind him, something shifted. Some invisible line was crossed. All right, Caleb said quietly. Let's see where this goes. Eliza smiled. Tomorrow. Come to the boarding house for dinner. Ruth won't mind. The whole town will know by midnight. Let them know. After he left, Eliza locked up and climbed the stairs to her room, her heart pounding. She'd just committed to something she couldn't fully name yet. Something that felt dangerous and reckless and absolutely necessary. The town had drawn their lines, and she and Caleb had just stepped across them together. The dinner at Ruth's boarding house became the talk of Iron Hollow before the soup course was even served. Eliza arrived first, helping Ruth set the table in the small dining room that overlooked the main street. It was a deliberate choice, sitting in full view of anyone who happened to walk by. No hiding, no shame. You're sure about this? Ruth asked, arranging silverware with practiced efficiency. No, Eliza admitted, but I'm doing it anyway. Ruth paused, studying her. You know what this looks like, don't you? A woman inviting a man to dinner, especially that man. Let it look however it looks. People will say you're courting him. Eliza met her eyes. And if we are? Ruth's eyebrows shot up. Are you? I don't know yet, but I'm not going to avoid finding out just because Margaret Pruitt disapproves. The older woman shook her head, but there was something like admiration in her expression. You've got spine, I'll give you that. Foolish spine maybe, but spine nonetheless. When Caleb arrived 10 minutes later, he looked like he'd rather face down a stampede than walk through that door. He stood on the porch for a solid 30 seconds before finally knocking, his shoulders tense under his clean shirt. Ruth answered, ushering him in with her usual no-nonsense warmth. Caleb, good to see you properly. Mrs. Patterson. He nodded respectfully, then his eyes found Eliza across the room. For a moment, neither of them moved. It felt different than their previous encounters, more deliberate, more weighted with possibility. You came, Eliza said. I said I would. People don't always do what they say. Something flickered across his face. No, they don't. Ruth seated them at the small table, and as she served a simple meal of roast chicken and vegetables, other boarders began filtering through. Some nodded politely. Others stared openly. One older man actually stopped mid-step, looked at Caleb, then at Eliza, and left without taking his usual seat. Well, Ruth said dryly, setting down a basket of bread. I see Tom's decided to skip dinner tonight. I can leave, Caleb said quietly. You'll do no such thing, Ruth's voice was firm. Tom can eat in his room if he's going to be ridiculous about it. The meal was awkward at first. Eliza could feel the weight of attention from the few remaining boarders, the careful way they weren't looking directly while clearly listening to every word. Caleb ate mechanically, his posture rigid. How's the work at the ranch? Eliza asked, trying to find normal ground. Busy. Calving season starting? That's good. It's necessary. He glanced up. We lost some stock over winter. Happens every year, but Mr. Whitmore's hoping for a strong spring to make up the numbers. You've been there a long time, haven't you? 8 years. Started as general labor, worked my way up to foreman. There was quiet pride in his voice, quickly tamped down. It's honest work. Better than honest, Ruth interjected. Ben Whitmore told me just last week that you're the best foreman he's ever had. Said the operation would fall apart without you. Caleb's ears reddened slightly. He's generous. He's truthful. Ruth passed the potatoes. You've got a gift for managing people and livestock both. That's not common. Watching him deflect the compliment, Eliza realized how starved he must be for simple acknowledgement. How long had it been since someone praised his work, his character, anything about him that wasn't filtered through Rebecca Stowe's lie? What about you? Caleb asked, clearly eager to shift attention. How's business? Eliza considered lying, then decided against it. Slower than I'd hoped. Some customers have stopped coming. Because of me. Because of small-minded gossip. That's not the same thing. He set down his fork. Eliza, you need to think about your future here. If you keep associating with me, I am thinking about my future, and I'd rather build it on honesty than compromise. Ruth made a small approving sound, which she quickly covered with a cough. After dinner, Caleb walked Eliza the short distance back to the hotel. It was barely 100 yards, but in a town like Iron Hollow, that 100 yards might as well have been a public declaration. The evening air was cool, carrying the smell of wood smoke and dust. Thank you for coming, Eliza said when they reached the hotel steps. I almost didn't. He looked up at the darkening sky. I kept thinking of reasons to cancel. Easier that way. For who? For both of us. Eliza turned to face him fully. Caleb, I need you to understand something. I'm not doing this out of pity or rebellion or whatever people think. I'm doing this because when I talk to you, I don't feel alone. And that's rare enough to be worth fighting for. He looked at her then, really looked, and she saw the exact moment he stopped protecting himself quite so carefully. I feel the same way. The admission hung between them, fragile and honest. Then let's keep doing this, Eliza said. Whatever this is, even if it costs you. Even then. He nodded slowly, something like wonder crossing his features. You're either the bravest person I've ever met, or the most stubborn. Can't I be both? The corner of his mouth lifted, not quite a smile, but close. I suppose you can. After he left, Eliza climbed to her room and sat by the window, watching his figure disappear into the darkness. Her hands were trembling slightly. Though whether from nervousness or excitement, she couldn't tell. She'd just committed to something that terrified her, and for the first time in years she felt fully alive. The next week brought a shift in the town's attitude. Not acceptance, but a kind of grudging acknowledgement that Eliza wasn't going to back down. The outright hostility softened into cold politeness. Customers returned, though some made a point of mentioning they were only there because no one else could do alterations as well. Eliza took their money and kept her opinions to herself. Caleb continued coming to town, and they fell into an unspoken routine. He'd stop by the shop when he had business, they'd talk for a few minutes, and twice more that month they shared meals at Ruth's boarding house. Nothing improper, always in public, always with Ruth as unofficial chaperone. But something was growing between them. Something neither of them had words for yet. One afternoon, Margaret Pruitt appeared at the shop with an unexpected olive branch. "Miss Hart, I wonder if we might speak privately." Eliza gestured to the back room. "Of course." Margaret settled into a chair with the air of someone preparing for an unpleasant task. "I've been thinking about our previous conversations." "Have you?" "I may have been hasty in my judgment of your association with Mr. Boone." The words came out stiffly, like they physically pained her. "It's clear you're not going to be dissuaded, and I suppose that shows a certain strength of character." Eliza waited. There was more coming. "However," Margaret folded her hands, "I would ask that you exercise discretion. Whatever you choose to do privately is your affair, but publicly, the appearance of propriety must be maintained, for all our sakes." "What are you actually asking, Mrs. Pruitt?" "I'm asking you to be sensible. See him if you must, but don't flaunt it. Don't make the rest of us complicit in endorsing something the community cannot accept." Eliza felt anger spark in her chest. "You want me to hide? To be ashamed? I want you to understand that there are consequences to defying social norms. Not just for you, but for other women trying to build respectable lives here." Margaret leaned forward. "You think you're fighting for principle, but what you're really doing is making it harder for the rest of us to maintain standards. Standards built on lies. Built on survival." Margaret's composure cracked slightly. "Do you think I like being the town's moral arbiter? I do it because someone has to, because without structure, without rules, everything falls apart. We've seen it happen. Towns that become lawless, where women have no protection, where reputation means nothing. Is that what you want?" "I want truth to matter more than reputation." Margaret stood. "You're young. You don't understand yet that sometimes reputation is all that protects us." She moved toward the door, then paused. "I'm trying to help you, Miss Hart, but I can only do so much if you insist on sabotaging yourself." After she left, Eliza sat in the quiet of her shop, Margaret's words echoing uncomfortably. Was she being selfish? Making things harder for other women by refusing to conform? But then she thought about Caleb's face when people crossed the street to avoid him. The careful way he'd learned to make himself smaller, quieter, less present. No. She couldn't accept that protecting him was somehow harmful to others. That evening, she was surprised by a visitor, Caroline, the young mother who'd first warned her about Caleb. She arrived after closing, glancing nervously up and down the street before slipping inside. "I can't stay long," she said immediately. "My husband doesn't know I'm here." "What's wrong?" Caroline twisted her hands together. "I wanted to apologize for what I said when you first arrived, about Mr. Boone." Eliza blinked. "Oh, I've been watching you two, at Ruth's around town, and I realized—" She took a breath. "I never actually knew what happened between him and Rebecca. I just repeated what everyone else said. We all did. And now I wonder if we got it wrong. Why the change of heart?" "Because my sister." Caroline's voice dropped. "She was jilted by a man back east. He spread rumors about her afterward, said terrible things to protect his own reputation. Lies. And I watched what it did to her, how people believed him without question because it was easier than asking for proof." She met Eliza's eyes. "I saw that same look on Mr. Boone's face yesterday. When he walked past the mercantile and those men made comments loud enough for him to hear, that beaten-down shame of someone who's been carrying a lie so long they almost believe it themselves." Eliza felt her throat tighten. "I'm glad you came. I can't say this publicly. My husband would be furious. He's friendly with some of those men. But privately, I wanted you to know, not everyone thinks you're wrong. After Caroline left, Eliza allowed herself a moment of hope. Maybe minds could change. Maybe truth could win, slowly, person by person. It was a fragile hope, but it was something. The following Sunday, Caleb did something he hadn't done in 3 years. He went to church. Eliza didn't know he was coming. She'd taken her usual seat near the back, away from the established families who clustered in the front pews, when the door opened and he walked in. The reaction was immediate. Conversation stopped mid-word, heads turned. Someone actually gasped. Caleb's jaw was tight, but he moved forward steadily, taking a seat in the very last row on the opposite side. Not near Eliza, that would have been too provocative, but present, visible. The minister, Reverend Hale, faltered slightly when he noticed, but recovered and began the service. His sermon was on forgiveness, which felt either perfectly timed or deeply ironic, depending on how you looked at it. Eliza couldn't focus on the words. She was too aware of the whispers, the stares, the palpable discomfort radiating through the congregation. Several people left early. Margaret Pruitt sat rigid in her pew, her back ramrod straight. After the service, most people filed out quickly, avoiding both Caleb and Eliza with equal determination. But Reverend Hale approached Caleb directly. "Mr. Boone, it's been some time." "Reverend." Caleb's voice was cautious. "I'm glad to see you. Everyone is welcome in this house." The words were kind, but Eliza noticed the Reverend didn't shake Caleb's hand, didn't stand close. Welcome, apparently, had limits. Outside, a small group had gathered. Margaret, her husband Thomas, and several other prominent citizens. They weren't blocking the door exactly, but their positioning made it impossible to leave without walking through them. Eliza reached Caleb's side as he exited. She didn't take his arm, that would have been too much, but she stood close enough that her allegiance was clear. "Mr. Boone," Thomas Pruitt's voice was cold. "Surprised to see you here." "I have as much right as anyone. Do you?" One of the other men, Gerald Sutton, who owned the bank, stepped forward. "Seems to me a man with your reputation should have the decency to worship elsewhere, or privately." "My reputation was given to me by a liar." Caleb's voice was steady, but Eliza could see his hands clenched at his sides. "I'm done accepting it." "So you say. But we only have your word against a respectable young woman's testimony. A woman who fled town rather than face questions." Eliza spoke up, and all eyes turned to her. "Convenient, don't you think?" Margaret's voice was icy. "Miss Hart, you're new here. You don't know what we know. I know gossip when I hear it, and I know cowardice when I see it." Eliza looked at each of them in turn. "You've spent 3 years punishing this man for something you can't prove. And now that someone's finally questioning your version of events, you're angry. Not because you know you're right, but because you're afraid you might be wrong." Gerald's face reddened. "How dare you?" "She dares because she's right." Ruth's voice cut through the tension. She'd emerged from the church behind them, along with a handful of other congregants who'd been listening. "I've been quiet about this for too long, but I knew Rebecca Stowe, and I knew she was spiteful when crossed. I watched what happened with Caleb, and I've had my doubts since the beginning." "Ruth," Margaret started. "No, Margaret, you don't get to silence everyone forever." Ruth looked around at the gathered crowd. "We made a choice 3 years ago to believe one person's word without question. Maybe it's time we reconsidered that choice." For a moment, no one spoke. Then Thomas Pruitt shook his head. "This is ridiculous. Come, Margaret." He took his wife's arm and they walked away, several others following. But not everyone left. A few people stayed, Ruth, obviously, Caroline and her husband, who looked uncomfortable but didn't leave, an older couple Eliza didn't know by name, the town's blacksmith. It wasn't many, but it was more than none. Caleb looked stunned, like he couldn't quite believe what had just happened. "Thank you," he said to Ruth, his voice rough. "Don't thank me. I should have spoken up years ago." Ruth's expression was fierce. "Shame on all of us for taking so long." As the small group dispersed, Eliza and Caleb walked together down the church steps. Neither spoke immediately, both processing what had just occurred. "That was—" Caleb started, then stopped. "I don't know what that was." "Progress, maybe? Or the beginning of war?" He glanced at her. "They're not going to forgive this easily." "Probably not." They'd reached the point where they usually parted, Caleb to his horse, Eliza to the hotel, but neither moved. Would you like to go for a walk? Caleb asked suddenly. There's a creek about a mile out of town. It's peaceful. It was a bold suggestion. Leaving town together alone would fuel every rumor imaginable. I'd like that, Eliza said. They walked in silence at first, following the road out of Iron Hollow until the buildings gave way to open prairie. The day was clear, the sky that particular shade of blue that seemed to exist only in wide open spaces. Grasshoppers clicked in the tall grass, and somewhere a meadowlark sang. The creek, when they reached it, was more of a stream, maybe 10 feet wide, lined with cottonwood trees that provided blessed shade. Caleb led her to a flat rock near the water's edge. I used to come here when things got bad, he said, sitting down, after Rebecca left, when the stairs got to be too much. Eliza sat beside him, close but not touching. What did you do out here? Thought about leaving, wondered if it would be easier to start over somewhere else. He picked up a smooth stone, turning it over in his hands. But then I'd remember that running wouldn't change anything. The shame would follow, so I stayed. I almost left, Eliza admitted, after my engagement ended. I had a ticket to California, was going to disappear completely. What stopped you? Anger, I think. I was furious that he got to destroy my reputation and face no consequences, that I was the one who had to run while he stayed comfortable. She pulled her knees up, wrapping her arms around them. So I stayed long enough to make sure people knew the truth. Then I left on my own terms. Did it help? People knowing the truth? Some believed me, most didn't. She rested her chin on her knees. Turns out the truth doesn't matter as much as we'd like to think. People believe what fits their existing narrative. They sat quietly for a moment, the water burbling over rocks. Can I ask you something? Caleb's voice was careful. Why are you really doing this? Fighting for me, risking everything. And don't say it's about principle. Eliza considered her answer carefully. It started as principle, but it's not anymore. Then what is it? She turned to look at him fully. It's you. The person you are when we talk. The way you see the world. How you've survived something that would have broken most people. She paused. When I'm with you, I don't feel like I have to pretend to be someone I'm not. And that's precious. Caleb was very still. Eliza. I know it's complicated. I know there are 100 reasons this doesn't make sense, but I can't seem to care about those reasons as much as I probably should. You should care. His voice was strained. Because I'm still the person everyone thinks I am. And what if they're right? About what? About me being inadequate. Broken. He couldn't meet her eyes. What if Rebecca was telling the truth and I've been lying to myself all this time? Eliza's heart cracked open. She reached out and took his hand, the first time they deliberately touched. His fingers were calloused, warm. Caleb, look at me. He did, reluctantly. I don't care what Rebecca Stowe said. I don't care what the whole town believes. You're not broken. You're not inadequate. You're a man who's been carrying an impossible burden, and you've done it with more grace than anyone had the right to expect. She squeezed his hand. Whatever happens between us, that's the truth, I believe. How can you be so sure? Because I've spent enough time with liars to recognize honesty when I see it. And you're honest, Caleb, painfully so. He looked down at their joined hands, his thumb moving across her knuckles in an absent gesture that felt more intimate than it should. I don't know how to do this. How to be with someone who actually sees me. Neither do I, so we'll figure it out together. People will say terrible things about you. Let them. Your business will survive or it won't. I'll figure it out either way. He was quiet for a long moment, then, I think I'm falling in love with you, and that terrifies me. Eliza's breath caught. Why does it terrify you? Because the last woman I loved used me for entertainment and then destroyed me when it suited her. Because I don't know if I can survive that again. I'm not her. I know. That's what terrifies me most. He finally met her eyes. You're real. And if this goes wrong, it's going to hurt in ways Rebecca never could have managed. Eliza understood. She felt the same fear, that awful vulnerability of caring about someone who could actually wound you. I can't promise it won't hurt, she said quietly. I can't promise we'll work out or that the town will accept us or that any of this will be easy, but I can promise I won't lie to you, I won't use you, and I won't run when things get hard. Caleb studied her face like he was memorizing it. Then, slowly, carefully, he lifted her hand and pressed his lips to her knuckles, a gesture so old-fashioned and tender it made her chest ache. "Then let's try," he said. "Let's try and see what happens." They sat by the creek until the sun began its descent, talking about nothing and everything, about childhoods and dreams and the strange paths that had led them both to Iron Hollow, about books they'd read and places they'd never been. And when Caleb finally walked her back to town as dusk was settling, they passed several people who stared and whispered. But this time Eliza didn't care. She was done living her life according to other people's fear. Whatever came next, she would face it with her eyes open and her heart unguarded, even if it destroyed her. The decision came to Eliza 3 weeks later, on an ordinary Tuesday morning while hemming a dress for a farmer's wife. She was going to marry Caleb Boone. The thought arrived fully formed, not as a question, but as a certainty. It should have terrified her. They'd only been courting for 2 months, and half the town still treated them like a public scandal. But somehow, sitting in her quiet shop with needle and thread, she'd never been more sure of anything. The question was whether Caleb would say yes. They'd grown closer in the weeks since their conversation by the creek. He came to town twice a week now, always finding reasons to stop by her shop. They took walks when weather permitted, always chaperoned by Ruth or in full public view. Nothing improper had happened. They hadn't even kissed. But the connection between them had deepened into something undeniable. Still, Caleb carried his fear like a second skin. She could see it in the way he hesitated before reaching for her hand, the way he sometimes looked at her like she might disappear if he blinked too hard. Rebecca's betrayal had carved something out of him that hadn't grown back. The shop door opened, interrupting her thoughts. She looked up, expecting a customer, and found Ben Whitmore instead. She'd seen the ranch owner in passing, but never spoken to him directly. He was a man in his late 50s, weathered and solid, with the kind of quiet authority that came from years of running a successful operation. "Mr. Whitmore," Eliza set down her sewing. "Can I help you?" "Miss Hart." He removed his hat. "I was hoping we could talk. About Caleb." Her stomach tightened. "Has something happened?" "In a manner of speaking." He settled into the chair she offered, turning his hat in his hands. "I'm making him a partner in the ranch. 20% stake, with the option to buy more over time." Eliza stared. That's extraordinary. It's overdue. He's been running that place better than I could for the past 3 years. Smart about the land, good with the men, knows cattle better than anyone I've met. He's earned it." Whitmore's expression was serious. "But he won't accept." "Why not?" "Says he doesn't deserve it, that he's not fit for that kind of responsibility." Whitmore's jaw tightened. "It's that damn rumor. 3 years, and it's still eating at him. He can't see his own worth because this town convinced him he doesn't have any." Eliza felt anger spark hot in her chest. "What do you want me to do?" "Talk to him. He listens to you in a way he doesn't listen to anyone else." Whitmore leaned forward. "Miss Hart, I don't know what your intentions are with Caleb, and it's none of my business. But I do know you've done more for that boy in 2 months than this whole town did in 3 years. He's different now, stands straighter, looks people in the eye. He's always been strong. He just needed permission to show it. Maybe. But you gave him that permission." Whitmore stood, replacing his hat. "The offer stands until the end of the month. After that, I'll have to look elsewhere. I hope you can help him see what I see." After he left, Eliza sat with the weight of it. A partnership. Real security, real future. But Caleb couldn't accept it because he still believed somewhere deep down that he was broken. She had to fix that. Not the partnership, that was his decision. But the belief. The lie that had burrowed so deep he'd mistaken it for truth. And she knew exactly how to do it. That evening, she rode out to the ranch. Caleb was in the barn, as usual, finishing the day's work. He looked up when she entered, surprise and pleasure crossing his face. "Eliza, I wasn't expecting you. I need to talk to you, privately." Something in her tone must have alarmed him because his expression shifted immediately. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. But I need you to listen to me, really listen, without arguing or deflecting." She moved closer. "Can you do that?" He nodded slowly, wariness settling over him. Eliza took a breath. "Ben Whitmore told me about the partnership offer." Caleb's face closed off. He had no right. He's worried about you, and he's right to be. She held up a hand when he started to protest. You're going to turn it down, aren't you? Because you don't think you deserve it. That's not... He stopped, his shoulders sagging. It's too much, Eliza. A partnership means responsibility, means being the face of the operation. How can I do that when half the town won't even look at me? You can do it because you're good at your job, because you've earned it through years of work that had nothing to do with Rebecca Stowe or what anyone thinks of your personal life. It's not that simple. It is exactly that simple. You're letting a lie control your entire life. You're letting it decide what opportunities you can accept, what future you can have. She stepped closer, forcing him to meet her eyes. And I'm done watching you do it. What do you want from me? The question came out raw, almost desperate. I want you to marry me. The words hung in the air between them, stark and impossible. Caleb stared at her like she'd spoken a language he didn't understand. What? I want you to marry me, Eliza repeated, her heart hammering. Not someday, not eventually, now. As soon as it can be arranged. You can't be serious. I've never been more serious about anything in my life. He took a step back, shaking his head. Eliza, you don't know what you're saying. Marriage to me would ruin you completely. Any chance you have of building a respectable life here would be gone. I don't want a respectable life built on lies and cowardice. I want a real life. With you. But why? His voice cracked. Why would you tie yourself to someone everyone believes is... He couldn't finish the sentence. Because I love you. The words came out simpler than she'd expected. Because when I think about my future, you're in it. Because I'm tired of being careful, and I'm tired of other people's fear dictating how I live. Caleb looked stunned. You love me. I do. But you don't know... He gestured helplessly. What if they're right? What if I can't be what you need? And there it was. The core of his fear laid bare. Eliza closed the distance between them and took his face in her hands, forcing him to look at her. Listen to me very carefully, Caleb Boone. I don't care what Rebecca Stowe said. I don't care what this town believes. The only thing I care about is you, the man standing in front of me. The man who's been kind and honest and strong, even when the whole world was telling him he wasn't worth anything. Eliza, I'm not finished. You're terrified that you'll disappoint me, that you'll prove everyone right. But you know what terrifies me? The idea that you'll spend the rest of your life alone because you believed a lie someone told about you when they were angry and vindictive. Her voice shook. Don't give her that power. Don't let her steal your whole life. What if I fail you? Then we'll deal with it. Together. Like people do. She let her hands drop but didn't step away. Marriage isn't about being perfect, Caleb. It's about choosing someone and working through whatever comes. And I'm choosing you. The question is whether you're brave enough to choose me back. He was silent for a long moment, his eyes searching her face like he was looking for doubt, for hesitation, for anything that would give him permission to refuse. This is insane, he said finally. Probably. The whole town will lose their minds. Let them. You could do so much better than me. I don't want better. I want you. Something in him cracked then. She could see it happen. The wall he'd built around himself developing fissures, letting light through. His hands came up to cover hers where they rested against his chest. I don't know how to be someone's husband. Neither of us knows how to be married. We'll figure it out. I'm scared, he admitted, the words barely audible. So am I. But I'd rather be scared with you than safe without you. Caleb pulled her close then, wrapping his arms around her in an embrace that felt like surrender and victory all at once. She felt him shaking slightly, felt the rapid beat of his heart against her cheek. Say yes, she whispered against his shirt. For a long moment, he didn't answer. Then, yes. God help us both, yes. Eliza pulled back just enough to see his face, and what she saw there made her chest ache. Fear, yes, but also something like hope. Something that looked almost like joy. We should tell people, she said. They're going to think you've lost your mind. Good. Let them think whatever they want. She smiled. When? When what? When should we get married? Caleb blinked. You want to set a date right now? Why wait? Give people time to talk us out of it? He laughed, an actual laugh, surprised and genuine. 2 weeks. That's how long it takes to post the bands and arrange things properly. 2 weeks then. They stood there in the dim barn, holding each other, and Eliza felt something settle in her chest. This was right. Terrifying and probably foolish, but right. I love you too, Caleb said quietly. I should have said it before. I love you, Eliza Hart. I know you do. How? Because you're here. Because you said yes even though you're terrified. That's love. He kissed her forehead, a gentle gesture that promised more than it delivered. 2 weeks, and then everyone in Iron Hollow is going to have an opinion. They already do. At least this way we'll be together when they voice them. The news spread through Iron Hollow like wildfire, and the reaction was exactly what Eliza had expected. Shock, outrage, and a fair amount of horrified fascination. Margaret Pruitt arrived at the shop the very next morning, her face pale with fury. Tell me it's not true. Eliza continued pinning fabric. If you're asking about the engagement, it's true. Have you completely taken leave of your senses? Margaret's voice climbed higher. Marriage to that man will destroy any chance you have of being accepted here. Your business will fail. You'll be ostracized from every social function. Your children, if you have any, will carry the stigma. Are you finished? I'm trying to save you from making the biggest mistake of your life. Eliza set down her pins and looked at Margaret directly. No, you're trying to maintain control over who gets accepted and who doesn't. You're angry because I'm refusing to play by rules designed to keep people in their place. Those rules protect us. They protect you, Eliza corrected. They protect your position, your authority, your ability to decide who's worthy. But they don't protect people like Caleb, who've done nothing wrong except trust the wrong person. Margaret's hands trembled. You're so sure he's innocent, but what if he's not? What if Rebecca was telling the truth and you're walking into a nightmare? Then it's my nightmare to walk into. And when you realize your mistake, when you're trapped in a marriage with a man who can't… She stopped, her cheeks flushing. Can't what, Margaret? Finish the sentence. You know what I mean. I know what Rebecca Stowe claimed. I don't know that it's true. And frankly, even if it were, there are more important things in a marriage than what happens in a bedroom. Margaret looked genuinely shocked. How can you say that? Because I've seen marriages built on physical compatibility fall apart over lack of trust, kindness, and respect. And I've seen partnerships thrive on much less than what I have with Caleb. Eliza's voice softened slightly. I appreciate your concern, truly, but this is my decision to make. Then you're a fool. Margaret turned toward the door, then paused. When this falls apart, and it will, don't expect sympathy from those you've spent weeks insulting. After she left, Eliza allowed herself a moment of doubt. Was she being a fool? Rushing into marriage with a man she'd known only a few months, against the advice of everyone around her? But then she thought about Caleb's face when he'd said yes, the way he'd held her like she was something precious, the quiet strength she'd watched him display every day despite the weight he carried. No, she wasn't being a fool, she was being brave. The next 2 weeks were a whirlwind of preparation and opposition. Some people, like Ruth, offered quiet support. Caroline sent a note wishing them well. The Reverend agreed to perform the ceremony, though he made it clear he had reservations. But most of the town either avoided them entirely or made their disapproval abundantly clear. Eliza's customer base dwindled to almost nothing. She heard whispers every time she walked down the street. One woman actually crossed herself when Eliza passed, like she was witnessing something unholy. Through it all, Caleb remained steady. He came to town every day, helped her with errands, ignored the stares and comments. And slowly, Eliza watched him transform. The careful, hunted look began to fade. His shoulders straightened. He met people's eyes instead of looking away. He was becoming the man he'd been before Rebecca destroyed him. 3 days before the wedding, Ben Whitmore threw them an unexpected party at the ranch. Nothing fancy, just ranch hands and a few townspeople who'd quietly aligned themselves with Caleb and Eliza. Ruth came, bringing food. Caroline and her husband appeared, looking nervous but determined. It wasn't much of a celebration by most standards, but standing there surrounded by people who'd chosen to support them despite the social cost, Eliza felt something close to joy. Caleb found her later after most people had gone home. They stood outside the barn under a sky full of stars, and for the first time since she'd proposed, he seemed truly at peace. Thank you, he said quietly. For what? For seeing me. for believing me when nobody else would. He took her hand. For loving me despite all the reasons you shouldn't. There are no reasons I shouldn't love you, Caleb. Only reasons other people made up to justify their own cruelty. I'm going to accept Ben's offer, the partnership. Eliza's breath caught. Really? You were right. I've been letting fear make my decisions for too long. If I'm brave enough to marry you, I should be brave enough to take what I've earned. He smiled slightly. Besides, a partner in a ranch is a better position for a married man than just a foreman. I'm proud of you. Don't be, not yet. Wait and see if I can actually do it. You can. I know you can. He pulled her close, and this time when he kissed her, it wasn't gentle or careful. It was real and deep and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. 2 more days, he murmured. Scared? Terrified. You? Absolutely. They laughed together, standing in the darkness, and Eliza thought about how far they'd both come. From that first day when she'd walked into his barn, to this moment where they stood on the edge of something that could either save them or destroy them. The wedding day arrived gray and threatening rain. Eliza dressed in her room at the hotel, wearing a simple dress she'd made herself, pale blue with white lace at the collar. Nothing fancy, nothing that pretended to be more than what this was. 2 people committing to each other despite everything. Ruth came to help with her hair, pinning it up in a simple style. You're sure about this? Ruth asked, meeting her eyes in the mirror. I'm sure. It's not too late to wait. Give people time to adjust. People have had 3 years to adjust. If they haven't figured out the truth by now, more time won't help. Eliza turned to face her. I'm doing this, Ruth. Today. Ruth smiled, something fierce and proud in her expression. Then let's get you married. The ceremony was held at the small church, and Eliza had expected it to be nearly empty. But when she walked through the door on Ruth's arm, she was surprised to find about 20 people scattered through the pews. Not many by normal standards, but more than she'd dared hope. Ben Whitmore was there, along with several ranch hands. Caroline and her husband, a few shopkeepers who'd quietly continued serving both her and Caleb. The town's doctor. Even the blacksmith, looking uncomfortable but present. And at the front, waiting with Reverend Hale, stood Caleb. He'd cleaned up, wearing what was clearly a new suit, his hair trimmed and his face cleanly shaved, but it was his expression that made Eliza's breath catch. Awe and terror and love all mixed together. She walked down the short aisle, acutely aware of the empty pews, the missing faces of people who should have been there but chose judgment over compassion. But she was also aware of those who'd come despite the social cost. When she reached Caleb, he took her hand and she felt the slight tremor in his fingers. You came, he whispered. Of course I came. I proposed, remember? A smile flickered across his face. Just checking. Reverend Hale began the ceremony, his voice steady and formal. He didn't offer personal commentary or judgment, just moved through the traditional words with professional efficiency. When they reached the vows, Caleb's voice was low but clear. I, Caleb Boone, take you, Eliza Hart, to be my wedded wife. To have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part. Eliza repeated the words back, her own voice stronger than she'd expected. And when Reverend Hale pronounced them married, the small congregation offered genuine applause. Caleb kissed her, brief and almost shy, and then they were walking back down the aisle as man and wife, facing whatever came next together. The reception was held at Ruth's boarding house, just cake and coffee for the small group who'd attended. Nothing elaborate, but it felt right. People offered congratulations and well wishes, carefully avoiding mention of the elephant in the room. Margaret Pruitt was notably absent, as were most of the town's prominent families. But Eliza didn't care. She had what she needed. As the afternoon wore on and people began to leave, Ben Whitmore pulled Caleb aside. Eliza watched them talk, saw Whitmore shake Caleb's hand firmly, saw something like pride in the older man's expression. When Caleb returned to her side, he was smiling. What did he say? That the partnership papers will be ready Monday, and that he's glad I finally came to my senses about more than just business. Smart man.
Eliza.
Caleb's voice dropped, becoming serious. We should talk about tonight. Her stomach flipped. Of course, their wedding night. The thing that had hung unspoken between them through all of this. The fear that Rebecca's claims might somehow be proven true. What about it? I just want you to know, he struggled for words. If things aren't, if I can't, I'll understand if you want to. She placed her fingers over his lips, stopping him. Caleb, stop. Whatever happens or doesn't happen tonight, we're married. We're together. That's what matters. But, no buts. We'll figure it out. Like we've figured everything else out. He pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. I don't deserve you. Stop saying that. You deserve everything good that comes to you. They'd rented a small house on the edge of town. Nothing fancy, just 2 rooms and a kitchen, but it was theirs. As evening fell and they made their way there, Eliza felt nervousness build in her chest. Not because she believed Rebecca's lie, but because this was real now. They were married, and whatever happened next would define the rest of their lives. The house was dark when they arrived. Caleb lit a lamp while Eliza stood awkwardly in the middle of the room, suddenly unsure what to do with her hands. I should... Caleb gestured toward the bedroom. I'll give you privacy to change. Caleb, he stopped. Come here. He crossed to her slowly and she took both his hands. I'm nervous, she admitted, but not because I think you're going to disappoint me. I'm nervous because this matters. Because you matter. Because I want this to be good for both of us. What if it's not? Then we'll try again and keep trying until we figure it out. She squeezed his hands. That's what marriage is, isn't it? Trying and failing and trying again until something works? I suppose it is. She reached up and kissed him, gentle at first, then deeper. And when he responded, when his arms came around her and pulled her close, she felt the last of her doubt dissolve. Whatever happened next, they'd face it together. The morning after their wedding, Eliza woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows and the sound of Caleb moving quietly in the kitchen. She lay still for a moment, taking inventory of herself, of the night that had passed, of the truth that now existed between them. Rebecca Stowe had lied. Not a small lie, not an exaggeration. A complete, deliberate fabrication designed to wound in the cruelest way possible. And Caleb had carried that lie for 3 years, believing on some level that it might be true, that he might somehow be the broken thing everyone said he was. Eliza felt anger flare hot in her chest, but she pushed it down. There would be time for anger later. Right now, she needed to focus on the man in the next room who'd spent the night proving every rumor wrong and then apologizing afterward like he'd somehow failed. She rose, wrapped herself in a robe, and found him standing at the stove, attempting to make coffee with the intense concentration of someone trying not to think too hard about anything else. Good morning, she said softly. He turned, and she saw the vulnerability in his eyes, the fear that she might have changed her mind overnight, that the light of day would reveal some regret. Morning, he gestured helplessly at the coffee pot. I'm not very good at this. Neither am I. We'll learn together. She crossed to him and wrapped her arms around his waist from behind, resting her cheek against his back. Stop worrying. I'm not... Yes, you are. I can feel it. She squeezed him gently. Last night was perfect, Caleb. Stop trying to find ways it wasn't. He turned in her arms, studying her face like he was searching for dishonesty. You're not just saying that? Have I lied to you yet? No. Then trust me now. Rebecca Stowe was a liar and a coward, and every person who believed her without question should be ashamed of themselves. Her voice was firm. You are exactly who you're supposed to be, and I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. Some of the tension left his shoulders. He pulled her close, burying his face in her hair, and they stood like that while the coffee boiled over and made a mess neither of them cared about. I love you, he murmured against her temple. I know. I love you too. What do we do now? Eliza pulled back to look at him. Now we live, we work, we build something together, and we let everyone see that we're happy, whether they like it or not. A slow smile spread across his face. That sounds good. They spent the morning cleaning up the small house, arranging the few possessions they'd brought, making it feel like a home. It was mundane work, but there was something deeply satisfying about it, about choosing where things would go, about building a shared space. Around noon, there was a knock at the door. Caleb answered it to find Ben Whitmore standing there with a young man Eliza didn't recognize. Hope I'm not interrupting the honeymoon, Whitmore said with a slight smile. but I wanted to introduce you to James Cooper. He's a lawyer from the county seat, and he's got the partnership papers ready for your signature." Caleb's eyes widened. "Already?" "Told you I was serious about this." Whitmore gestured to the young lawyer. "James has been handling ranch business for years. He'll walk you through everything." They spent the next hour at the small kitchen table going over contracts and terms. Eliza sat nearby, ostensibly mending, but actually listening to every word. She watched Caleb's face as he read through the documents, saw the moment it truly hit him that this was real. 20% stake, Cooper said, pointing to a clause, with the option to purchase an additional 15% over the next 5 years at fixed rates. Mr. Whitmore retains controlling interest, but you'll have full say in operational decisions and equal profit sharing. "This is too generous," Caleb said, looking at Whitmore. "It's what you've earned. Stop arguing and sign the damn papers." Caleb signed, his hand steady, and when it was done, Whitmore shook his hand firmly. "Welcome to partnership, Caleb. I expect we'll do great things together." After they left, Caleb sat staring at the signed contract like he couldn't quite believe it was real. "You did it," Eliza said softly. "We did it. I never would have had the courage to accept if you hadn't." He stopped, shaking his head. "You changed everything. You changed yourself. I just reminded you who you were." That afternoon, they walked into town together, the first time as a married couple. Eliza had her sewing to pick up from the shop, and Caleb needed supplies from the general store. They could have gone separately, made it easier on themselves. But they didn't. The reaction was immediate. People stared, whispered. Some crossed the street to avoid them. But others, a surprising number, offered stiff nods of acknowledgement. The blacksmith actually called out a greeting. Caroline waved from across the street, her smile genuine. At the general store, the proprietor, Mr. Henderson, served them with professional courtesy. No warmth, but no hostility either. "Congratulations on your marriage," he said as he tallied their purchases. "And on the partnership, Mr. Boone. Heard the news this morning?" "Thank you," Caleb said, clearly surprised. "Ben Whitmore's no fool. If he made you a partner, you must be worth it." Henderson counted out change. Good for the whole area having the ranch in capable hands. It was a small thing, but Eliza saw what it meant to Caleb. Recognition for his work, his abilities, separate from the scandal. Acknowledgement that he had value beyond what people whispered about. They were leaving the store when they nearly collided with Margaret Pruitt. The older woman stopped short, her expression rigid. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Margaret's eyes dropped to Eliza's left hand, where a simple gold band now sat. "So you actually went through with it?" "We did," Eliza said calmly. Margaret's jaw tightened. "I suppose congratulations are in order then, though I maintain you've made a terrible mistake." "That's your opinion, Mrs. Pruitt. You're entitled to it." "Am I?" Margaret's voice was sharp. "Or will you spend the next months lecturing everyone about how wrong we all are, how judgmental and cruel?" Caleb's hand tightened on Eliza's arm, but she stayed calm. "I have no interest in lecturing anyone. I just want to live my life. If that makes you uncomfortable, that's something you'll need to work through on your own." "You're very self-satisfied, aren't you? Very sure of yourself and your choices." "I'm sure of my husband. That's all that matters." Something flickered across Margaret's face. Anger, yes, but also something that looked almost like uncertainty. "We'll see how long that certainty lasts." She swept past them, and Eliza felt Caleb release a breath he'd been holding. "That went better than expected," he said dryly. "She didn't throw anything. I'm counting it as a win." They walked home hand in hand, and despite the stares and whispers, Eliza felt something close to peace. They'd done it. They'd married despite everything, and the world hadn't ended. In fact, it was starting to feel like maybe, just maybe, they might actually be okay. The next few weeks settled into a rhythm. Caleb worked at the ranch, throwing himself into his new partnership responsibilities with fierce determination. Eliza reopened her shop, and while business was slow, it was steady enough. Some customers had trickled back, either because they needed her skills or because they'd decided the scandal wasn't worth holding on to forever. They had dinner at Ruth's boarding house every Sunday, a small tradition that became important quickly. Ruth treated them like family, and her quiet support meant more than Eliza could express. One evening, about a month after the wedding, they were finishing dishes when Caleb brought up something that had clearly been on his mind. "I've been thinking about expanding the house," he said, wiping down the table. "Adding another room?" Maybe 2. Eliza paused, a plate in her hands. Why? Because. He looked almost embarrassed. I thought maybe eventually we might need the space. For children. Her heart did something complicated in her chest. They hadn't talked about children yet, hadn't planned that far ahead. But hearing him say it, hearing the hope in his voice, made something warm bloom inside her. I'd like that, she said softly. Someday. Really? Really. Though let's get through our first year of marriage before we start planning nurseries. He smiled, that rare, genuine expression that still took her breath away. Deal. But even as they settled into domesticity, Eliza couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming, that the fragile peace they'd built was about to be tested in ways they hadn't anticipated. The test came 2 months later, in the form of a letter. Eliza was in her shop when Ruth appeared, looking troubled, holding an envelope. This came in on the morning stage. It's addressed to Margaret Pruitt, but... Ruth hesitated. The return address is Rebecca Stowe. From Philadelphia. Eliza's blood went cold. Does Margaret know? Not yet. The postal clerk is my nephew. He thought I should see it first. It was completely improper. Reading someone else's mail was a crime. But Eliza looked at that envelope and knew with absolute certainty that whatever it contained, it was important. Open it, she said. Ruth did, carefully breaking the seal. She read silently for a moment, her expression darkening. Then she handed it to Eliza. The letter was brief, written in elegant script. Dear Margaret, I hope this letter finds you well. I'm writing because my conscience has been troubling me these past months. I've been engaged to a wonderful man here in Philadelphia, and as I prepare for my wedding, I find myself thinking about past mistakes. I'm sure you remember the situation with Caleb Boone. I want you to know that I've come to regret how I handled things. I was young and angry when my father insisted I leave Iron Hollow, and I said things I shouldn't have, things that weren't entirely accurate. I don't know if Mr. Boone is still in the area, but if he is, I hope he's found peace. What happened between us was complicated, and I'm not proud of how I left things. Please give my regards to the ladies' social committee. Sincerely, Rebecca Stowe. Eliza read it twice, anger building with each word. Not entirely accurate. Wasn't proud of how she left things. She looked at Ruth. She's trying to clear her conscience without actually admitting she lied. But she's admitting something went wrong, that her account wasn't truthful. Ruth's voice was hard. That's enough. Is it? She doesn't say what she lied about, doesn't apologize, just vaguely suggests she might have been too harsh. Eliza crumpled the letter in her fist. She destroyed Caleb's life, and this is what passes for making amends? It's more than we had before. Ruth took the letter back, smoothing it out. Eliza, this could change things. If Margaret sees this, when Margaret sees this, she'll do exactly what Rebecca did. She'll find a way to accept it without admitting she was wrong. She'll say Rebecca was being too hard on herself, or that the situation was complicated, or any number of things that let her keep believing what she wants to believe. Ruth was quiet for a moment. You're probably right, but Caleb should still see it. He deserves to know she's at least partly admitted fault. Eliza took the letter, folding it carefully. I'll show him tonight. But Ruth, we need to make sure Margaret gets this too. She doesn't get to sweep this under the rug. My nephew will deliver it this afternoon, like he was supposed to. By tomorrow, half the town will know. Ruth's expression was grim. The question is what they'll do with the information. That evening, Eliza showed Caleb the letter. He read it in silence, his face unreadable. Not entirely accurate, he said finally, his voice flat. 3 years. 3 years of being treated like I was diseased. And the best she can do is not entirely accurate. I know. She's getting married, starting fresh with someone new, and she wants to feel better about herself, so she writes this. He gestured with the letter. This nothing of an apology to Margaret Pruitt, of all people, not even to me, and expects it to make things right. Eliza sat beside him, taking his hand. It doesn't make it right. Nothing can make it right. But it's proof, Caleb. Written proof that her story wasn't truthful. Will it matter? Will anyone care? His voice was raw. Or will they just find new ways to justify what they believed all along? Some will, but some won't, and the ones who matter, the ones who stood by us, They'll see it for what it is. Vindication. He was quiet for a long moment, staring at the letter. Then he did something Eliza hadn't expected. He started laughing, a harsh, bitter sound that held no humor. I spent 3 years thinking I was broken, wondering if maybe she was right, if maybe there was something wrong with me that I couldn't see. And it was all... He crumpled the letter just like Eliza had. It was all because she was angry and wanted to hurt me. That's it. That's the whole reason. Eliza pulled him close, and he let her, his body shaking with a rage he'd been holding back for years. I hate her, he whispered. I know I shouldn't, but I hate her so much. You're allowed to hate her. She earned it. What do we do with this? We let people see it. We let the truth spread the way the lie did, and we watch what happens. What happened was chaos. Margaret received the letter the next day, and by evening, news of its contents had spread through Iron Hollow like a flash flood. The reaction split the town sharply down the middle. Some people, like Ruth and Caroline, saw it as clear evidence that Rebecca had lied and that Caleb had been wronged. They became vocal supporters, no longer quiet about their belief in his innocence. But others, particularly Margaret and her circle, twisted themselves into knots trying to maintain their position. The letter became complicated and open to interpretation. Rebecca was conflicted and being too hard on herself. The situation had been misunderstood on both sides. The mental gymnastics required to avoid admitting error would have been impressive if it wasn't so infuriating. 3 days after the letter arrived, Eliza was in her shop when a group of women entered, not Margaret's usual circle, but women she recognized from church and around town. They looked uncomfortable but determined. The spokeswoman was a woman named Sarah, wife of one of the ranch hands. Miss Hart, Mrs. Boone, I mean, we wanted to apologize. Eliza set down her sewing. For what? For believing the rumors, for treating your husband badly, for... Sarah's voice cracked slightly. For being cowards, I suppose. We knew the gossip felt wrong, but it was easier to go along than to question it. The other women nodded, several looking ashamed. Rebecca's letter made us realize how easily we accepted her word without proof. And that's not right. That's not how people should treat each other. Sarah twisted her hands together. We know an apology doesn't fix 3 years of cruelty, but we wanted you to know that some of us are trying to do better. Eliza felt something loosen in her chest. Thank you. That means more than you know. Is there anything we can do to make amends? Be honest. If someone tries to twist Rebecca's letter into something it's not, speak up. Don't let the lie keep living just because admitting error is uncomfortable. They promised they would, and after they left, Eliza sat in her shop and cried. Not from sadness, but from relief. The truth was winning. Slowly, painfully, but winning. That Sunday, church was tense. Caleb and Eliza arrived to find the building more crowded than usual. People had come to see how Reverend Hale would address the situation. He didn't disappoint. His sermon was on bearing false witness, on the harm caused by spreading rumors, on the responsibility each person had to seek truth before judgment. He didn't name Rebecca or Caleb specifically, but everyone knew what he was talking about. When we accept gossip without evidence, Hale said from the pulpit, we become accomplices to whatever harm that gossip causes. We cannot hide behind ignorance or claim we were just repeating what we heard. We are accountable for our words and our silence both. Margaret sat rigid in her pew, her face pale. Several of her close friends looked equally uncomfortable. After the service, something unprecedented happened. People approached Caleb, not to condemn or whisper, but to speak to him directly, to shake his hand, to offer belated congratulations on his marriage and partnership. It wasn't everyone. Some still avoided them, still clung to the old narrative. But it was enough to show that the tide had turned. Ben Whitmore pulled Caleb aside. I'm increasing your stake to 30%. You've more than earned it. Ben, that's non-negotiable. You've been running that ranch better than I ever did, and it's time the numbers reflected that. He clapped Caleb on the shoulder. Besides, now that people know the truth, I want everyone to see how much I value you. That evening, sitting in their small house, Caleb was quiet. Eliza could see him processing everything, the vindication, the apologies, the slow return to something like normalcy. I don't know how to feel, he admitted finally. I'm angry at how long it took. angry that it needed Rebecca's half admission to change minds instead of just my word being enough. But I'm also, he paused. I'm relieved and grateful and so tired. Eliza moved to sit beside him. You're allowed to feel all of it. I keep thinking about the 3 years I lost, the opportunities I didn't take because I believed I wasn't worth them, the isolation I accepted as normal. His voice roughened. I can't get that time back. No, but you can make sure the time ahead is different. He pulled her close, and they sat in silence as evening darkened into night. Outside, Iron Hollow went about its business, the town slowly, painfully, learning that the truth mattered more than comfort, more than preserving the appearance of being right. The next week brought more changes. Eliza's shop suddenly became busy. Women who'd avoided her for months appeared with sewing projects, some offering awkward apologies, others just acting like nothing had ever been wrong. Caleb was invited to join the town council, a position previously unthinkable. He accepted, not because he wanted the responsibility, but because he refused to let fear dictate his choices anymore. And slowly, painfully, Iron Hollow began to heal from the wound it had inflicted on itself. But Margaret Pruitt remained a holdout. She'd never directly acknowledged that Rebecca had lied or that she'd been wrong. Instead, she simply stopped talking about it, carrying her error like a silent burden. One afternoon, nearly 3 months after Rebecca's letter arrived, Eliza encountered Margaret at the general store. They'd been avoiding each other carefully, but today there was no escape. Mrs. Pruitt? Mrs. Boone. They stood in tense silence for a moment. Then Margaret spoke, her voice low. You were right. About my husband. About the town. About all of it. I was wrong. Eliza blinked, startled. I'm not going to make a public statement. I'm not going to prostrate myself and beg forgiveness. But I wanted you to know that I see it now. What we did to him. To you. Margaret's face was tight. I built my life on being the moral authority here, on knowing what was right, and it turns out I was the one spreading poison. Why are you telling me this? Because you deserve to hear it, and because I'm tired of carrying it alone. Margaret's eyes were hard. I won't forget what you said to me, that my rules were designed to protect my position, not people. You were right. She left before Eliza could respond, and Eliza stood in the middle of the store, holding a spool of thread, feeling like she'd just witnessed something important. That night, she told Caleb about the encounter. She apologized? In her way. It wasn't much, but it was something. Caleb was quiet, thinking, I don't know if I can forgive her. Or any of them, really. You don't have to. Forgiveness isn't mandatory. What do you think I should do? Eliza considered. I think you should do whatever feels right to you. If you want to forgive, forgive. If you want to stay angry, but don't let them take any more of your life than they already have. He nodded slowly. I can do that. They sat together in their small house, the lamp burning low, and Eliza thought about how far they'd come. From that first day when she'd walked into his barn to now, when they were building a real life together despite everything that had tried to stop them. The truth had won. Not easily, not cleanly, but decisively. And that was enough. 5 years changed everything. Eliza stood at the window of their expanded house, no longer the small 2-room cottage they'd started with, but a proper home with 4 bedrooms, a real kitchen, and a porch that wrapped around 3 sides. The addition Caleb had mentioned that first month of marriage had grown into something far more ambitious as the ranch prospered and their family expanded. She watched her husband cross the yard with their 3-year-old daughter perched on his shoulders, both of them laughing at something. Behind them, the ranch stretched out in every direction, hundreds of acres now, with Caleb's stake grown to 45%. He'd become the de facto manager, with Ben Whitmore gradually stepping back into semi-retirement. Their son, barely 6 months old, stirred in the cradle beside her, and Eliza felt that familiar pull of gratitude mixed with exhaustion that came with being a mother. Nothing about the past 5 years had been easy or simple, but it had been real. The transformation of Iron Hollow had been slower and more complicated than any storybook ending. Rebecca's letter hadn't magically erased 3 years of damage or instantly changed minds. Some people had adjusted their views grudgingly. Others had simply stopped talking about it without ever admitting they'd been wrong. And a stubborn few still clung to the old narrative, though they'd learned to keep their opinions quieter. But the Boons had built something that couldn't be ignored or dismissed, a life so solid, so undeniably successful, that it forced people to confront their own prejudices, whether they wanted to or not. Caleb came through the door, setting their daughter down. Little Sarah immediately ran to her mother, chattering about the new calf she'd seen in the barn. "She's going to be a rancher," Caleb said, grinning. "Already has opinions about which cattle are the best quality. She's 3. She has opinions about everything." Eliza smoothed her daughter's wild hair. "Go wash up for dinner, sweetheart." After Sarah scampered off, Caleb crossed to Eliza and kissed her forehead. "Ben wants to talk tomorrow. Says he has a proposal." "What kind of proposal?" "Wouldn't say. But he had that look, the one he gets when he's planning something big." They'd learned to trust Ben's instincts over the years. His decision to make Caleb a partner had proven brilliant. The ranch had nearly doubled its profitability under Caleb's management, and they'd expanded into horse breeding with remarkable success. The next morning, Eliza accompanied Caleb to the main ranch house. Ben met them in his office, looking older but still sharp-eyed. "I'm selling," he said without preamble. Caleb went very still. "What?" "I'm 73 years old, my back hurts, my knees are shot, and I'm tired of worrying about cattle prices and drought and all the rest of it." Ben leaned back in his chair. "I want to spend what time I have left fishing and playing with my grandchildren, so I'm selling the ranch." "To who?" Eliza asked, her heart sinking. A new owner could change everything. Ben smiled. "To you two, if you want it." The silence was absolute. "Ben," Caleb started, "I'm serious. Full ownership, minus a small percentage I'll keep for retirement income. You've been running this place for years anyway. It should be yours. We can't afford—" "I'm not asking market price. I'm asking what's fair between partners." Ben pushed a paper across the desk. "I've had it valued and worked out terms. You'd pay me over 20 years at reasonable rates. The ranch makes enough to cover it comfortably if you manage it the way you've been doing." Caleb picked up the paper with shaking hands. Eliza read over his shoulder, her mind racing. It was an extraordinary offer, generous to the point of being almost a gift. "Why?" Caleb asked hoarsely. "Why give us this?" "Because you earned it. Because this ranch deserves owners who love it. And because—" Ben's voice softened. "Because I remember what this town did to you, son. How they tried to destroy you over lies. And I'll be damned if I let them take one more thing from you. This ranch should be yours. It's already yours in every way that matters." Eliza watched tears form in Caleb's eyes, something she still rarely saw, even after 5 years of marriage. "I don't know what to say," Caleb managed. "Say yes. Build something that lasts. Raise those children here. Make this place everything it can be." Ben stood, offering his hand. "What do you say, partner? Want to be a ranch owner?" Caleb stood and shook his hand, unable to speak. Eliza answered for both of them. "Yes. We say yes." The news spread through Iron Hollow like wildfire, and the reaction was telling. Most people congratulated them genuinely. Caleb had proven himself too thoroughly to dismiss. But a few voices grumbled about favoritism, about Ben being too generous, about whether someone with Caleb's past deserved such good fortune. Those voices grew quieter when people realized they were now talking about one of the region's most successful ranchers. Money and success had a way of changing how people viewed you, for better or worse. One evening, about a week after they'd signed the purchase agreement, there was a knock at their door. Eliza answered to find Margaret Pruitt standing on the porch, looking uncomfortable. "Mrs. Pruitt, this is unexpected." "May I come in? I won't take much of your time." Eliza hesitated, then stepped aside. Margaret entered the house she'd probably expected to see fail, looking around at the comfortable furnishings, the children's toys scattered across the floor, the evidence of a thriving household. Caleb emerged from the bedroom, stopping short when he saw their visitor. "Mr. Boone," Margaret said stiffly, "congratulations on purchasing the ranch. It's quite an accomplishment." "Thank you." His voice was guarded. Margaret took a breath. "I came because I owe you both an apology. A real one. Not the private admission I gave Mrs. Boone months ago." She looked directly at Caleb. "I was wrong about you. Completely, inexcusably wrong. I believed Rebecca Stowe without question, and I spent 3 years treating you like you were less than human because of those beliefs. That was cruel and unjust, and I'm sorry." Caleb said nothing, his face unreadable. I don't expect forgiveness, Margaret continued. I'm not sure I deserve it, but I wanted you to know that I see what I did. I see how I used my position to enforce a lie, how I made others complicit in that enforcement, and I'm ashamed. The silence stretched. Finally, Caleb spoke. Why now? Why after all this time? Because watching you succeed, watching you build this life despite everything we did, it forced me to confront what I'd been avoiding. You didn't just survive what we did to you, you thrived. And that's more damning than any accusation I could have faced. Eliza watched her husband process this. She knew him well enough to see the war happening inside him, the anger that had never fully dissipated, the hurt that still surfaced sometimes, battling against the part of him that had learned to let go. I appreciate the apology, he said finally, but you're right that I can't forgive you. Not yet. Maybe not ever. What you did, what all of you did, it took years from me. Years I can't get back. Margaret nodded, her face pale. I understand, but... Caleb glanced at Eliza, then back to Margaret. I don't want to carry the anger anymore. It's heavy, and I'm tired of it. So while I can't forgive you, I can choose to stop letting what happened control me. That's the best I can offer. That's more than fair. Margaret moved toward the door, then paused. For what it's worth, you've taught this town something important. About truth, about courage, about what it means to live with integrity. I hope we've learned from it. After she left, Caleb sat heavily in his chair. Are you all right? Eliza asked softly. I think so. It's strange. I thought I'd feel better if she apologized, but I just feel empty. Like even her admission can't fix what was broken. Some things can't be fixed. They can only be survived. He pulled her down onto his lap, holding her close. I'm glad I had you to survive it with. The years continued to pass, and the Boone Ranch, as it was now called, flourished. Caleb proved to have an instinct for the business that went beyond just managing cattle. He diversified into horse breeding, invested in better grazing techniques, and built relationships with buyers across 3 states. Eliza's sewing business had evolved into something different. She no longer took in regular alterations, but instead focused on custom dressmaking for special occasions. Her work was sought after throughout the region, though she only took projects that interested her. The freedom to choose was a luxury she'd never take for granted. Their family grew. Another daughter arrived 2 years after their son, completing what Caleb jokingly called their small herd. The children grew up knowing their father as a respected businessman and community leader with no idea that he'd once been the town's pariah. Ruth remained a constant presence in their lives, eventually moving into a small cottage on their property when she could no longer manage the boarding house alone. She spent her days helping with the children and offering the kind of wisdom that only came from having lived a full life. One afternoon, nearly 7 years after their wedding, Eliza found Caleb standing at the fence line, watching their oldest daughter practice riding. She's good, Eliza said, coming to stand beside him. She's fearless, like her mother. I was never fearless. I was just stubborn. He smiled. Same thing sometimes. They stood in comfortable silence, watching their daughter circle the paddock. Finally, Caleb spoke. Do you ever regret it? Marrying me, fighting the town, all of it. Eliza looked at him in surprise. Never. Why would you ask that? Because I know what it cost you. Your business suffered for years. You lost friendships. You had to fight battles you wouldn't have faced if you'd chosen someone else. I didn't want someone else. I wanted you. She took his hand. And yes, it was hard. There were days I questioned whether we'd make it, whether the town would ever accept us. But I never regretted choosing you. We got lucky, he said quietly. Ben's offer, Rebecca's letter, everything falling into place the way it did. It could have easily gone the other way. Maybe. But we also made our own luck. We refused to hide. We built something too strong to ignore. That wasn't chance, Caleb. That was choice. He pulled her close, resting his chin on top of her head. I used to think my life was over. After Rebecca left, after the rumors spread, I thought the best I could hope for was to survive, to get through each day without things getting worse. And now? Now I have everything I never thought I'd be allowed to want. A family, respect, a future that's actually mine. His voice roughened. You gave me that. You and your stubborn refusal to accept what everyone said was true. You gave it to yourself. I just reminded you it was possible." They watched their daughter dismount and lead her horse to the barn, chattering to the animal like it could understand every word. In the distance, they could see the ranch hands finishing the day's work, the cattle settling in the far pastures, the sun beginning its descent toward the horizon. It was a life built on truth and stubbornness and the refusal to let other people's lies define reality. 10 years after their wedding, Iron Hollow held a festival to celebrate the town's 50th anniversary. The Boons were asked to sit on the planning committee, a request that would have been unthinkable a decade earlier. The festival itself was a typical small-town affair: food stalls, games for children, speeches from local officials. But what made it remarkable was a ceremony the town council had organized to honor longtime residents and business owners who'd contributed to the community's growth. Caleb was called to the podium as one of the honorees, recognized for his role in making the Boone Ranch one of the most successful operations in the region. As he stood there accepting applause from the same people who'd once crossed the street to avoid him, Eliza felt tears prick her eyes. Not because the recognition erased what had been done to him. It didn't. But because it represented something important. The town acknowledging, however imperfectly, that they'd been wrong and he'd been right. That evening, after the children were asleep and the house was quiet, Eliza and Caleb sat on their porch watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. "Ruth said something interesting today," Eliza mentioned. "She said we changed this town more than we realized." "How so?" "She said people are more careful now about believing gossip. That after watching what happened with us, they're slower to judge, quicker to question rumors." Eliza leaned her head against his shoulder. "She said we taught Iron Hollow the difference between reputation and character." "I'm not sure we taught them anything. I think they just got tired of being wrong." "Maybe, but the result is the same. People think twice before destroying someone's life over hearsay now. That's worth something." Caleb was quiet for a moment. "I saw Caroline today. She's on the school board now, pushing for policies about gossip and bullying among students. She said she thought of us when she wrote the proposals." "We started something," Eliza said softly. "Not just our marriage, but a different way of thinking about truth and judgment. Maybe that's the real victory. Not that we survived, but that we made it harder for the next person to suffer what you did." "You really believe that?" "I do. I see it in how people treat newcomers now, how they give second chances more readily. We didn't change everyone, but we changed enough." Years continued to pass, each one adding to the life they'd built. Their children grew, the ranch prospered, and the Boons became so thoroughly established that eventually people forgot there'd ever been a scandal. But Eliza never forgot. Neither did Caleb. They carried those early years like foundation stones, painful reminders of what they'd overcome, yes, but also proof of their strength. When their oldest daughter, Sarah, turned 16, she came to them with questions. She'd heard whispers, fragments of the old story, and wanted to know the truth. They told her. Not the intimate details, but the broad strokes. How her father had been lied about, how the town had believed those lies, how her parents had fought against that injustice. Sarah listened with growing outrage. "That's horrible. How could people be so cruel?" "Because believing a lie is easier than questioning it," Caleb said. "Especially when everyone around you believes it too." "But you proved them wrong." "We proved ourselves right," Eliza corrected. "That's different. We didn't change minds through arguments. We changed them by living a life so full and real that the lies couldn't coexist with it." Sarah was quiet for a moment, processing. "Is that why you and Mama always tell us to think for ourselves? To question what people say?" "Partly, but also because that's just good practice." Caleb smiled slightly. "The world is full of people who'll tell you what to think, who to trust, what's true. You have to be brave enough to decide those things for yourself. Even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." That conversation stayed with Eliza for days afterward. She realized that what they'd been through had shaped not just their lives, but their values, their parenting, the entire foundation of their family. The pain had been transformed into purpose. 20 years after their wedding, Ben Whitmore passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 88. The funeral was well attended, and Caleb gave the eulogy, his voice strong and clear as he talked about the man who'd given him a chance when no one else would. "Ben Whitmore saved my life," Caleb said from the pulpit. "Not by giving me a job or even by making me a partner, though those things mattered. He saved my life by treating me like I was worth something when the whole world was telling me I wasn't. He saw past rumors and gossip to the person underneath, and in doing so, he gave me permission to see myself that way too. After the service, people approached Caleb, old-timers who remembered those early days, younger folks who only knew him as the successful rancher, all of them offering condolences, sharing their own stories of how Ben had impacted their lives. Margaret Pruitt, now in her 70s and moving slowly with a cane, made her way to them. Mr. Boone, Mrs. Boone. She'd never stopped using their formal titles, maintaining a distance that felt appropriate given their history. Ben would be proud of what you've done with his ranch, with everything. Thank you, Mrs. Pruitt. I think about those early days sometimes, Margaret said, her voice wavering slightly. My mistakes, the damage I caused, I never stopped being sorry for it. Caleb studied her for a moment. Then, to Eliza's surprise, he said something he never had before. I forgive you. Margaret's eyes widened. You don't have to. I know, but I'm choosing to. Not because you deserve it or because enough time has passed, but because I'm tired of carrying that weight. You were wrong. You hurt me badly, and I'm letting it go anyway. Tears filled Margaret's eyes. Thank you. That's more than I ever expected. After she walked away, Eliza took Caleb's hand. That was big. It was time. Holding on to that anger, it wasn't hurting her anymore. It was only hurting me. 25 years after their wedding, Eliza and Caleb celebrated their anniversary with their children and grandchildren. Sarah had married and given them 2 grandchildren already, with their son recently engaged. They stood on the porch of their home, looking out at the ranch that had become their legacy. And Eliza thought about everything that had brought them to this moment. Do you remember that first day I came to the barn? She asked. Every detail. I thought you were either crazy or lost. I was both, probably. She smiled. But I was also right. About you. About us. You were stubborn. There's a difference. Same thing sometimes. He laughed, pulling her close. We did all right, didn't we? Better than all right. We built something real, something that lasted. Their oldest grandson ran past, chasing one of the ranch dogs, his laughter echoing across the yard. Behind them, the house was full of family, full of life, full of the future they'd fought so hard to create. You know what the best part is, Caleb said? Our grandchildren will grow up never knowing what it's like to be judged for something they didn't do. They'll see their grandfather as a respected businessman, their grandmother as a talented seamstress and strong woman. The lies won't touch them. That's the real victory, Eliza agreed. Breaking the cycle, making sure the next generation grows up in truth instead of rumors. As the sun set over the ranch, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Eliza thought about the girl who'd arrived in Iron Hollow 25 years ago with nothing but determination and a refusal to accept borrowed truths. She'd been running from judgment then, trying to escape her own scandal. Instead, she'd found something better, a reason to stand and fight, a person worth defending, a love worth building a life around. The journey hadn't been easy or smooth. There had been setbacks and pain, moments when giving up would have been so much simpler. But they'd chosen to keep going, to keep building, to keep proving through action what words could never accomplish. And in the end, they hadn't just survived the judgment. They'd transcended it entirely, building a life so rich and full that the old lies simply couldn't exist in the same space. They'd won not by destroying their enemies or proving everyone wrong, but by living so completely, so authentically, that reality eventually overpowered fiction. That was the lesson Iron Hollow had learned slowly and painfully. The truth didn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it whispered through the simple act of living well. Sometimes the most powerful argument was a life that refused to be diminished by lies. Caleb tightened his arm around her waist. What are you thinking about? How lucky we are. Not because everything was easy, but because we found each other when we both needed someone brave enough to see past the surface. I was the lucky one. You saved my life, Eliza. We saved each other, she corrected. That's how it works when you choose the right person. As darkness settled over the ranch and stars began to appear, they stayed on the porch, holding each other, surrounded by the life they'd built together. A life that had started with a single act of courage, choosing to see truth instead of accepting lies. And in the end, that choice had made all the difference. Their story became part of Iron Hollow's history, told to newcomers as an example of the town's growth and change. The details softened over time, some people remembering it as a simple love story, others as a tale of perseverance. But for Eliza and Caleb, it was never about the story others told. It was about the life they'd lived, imperfect, challenging, real. About choosing courage over comfort, truth over acceptance, love over safety. They'd walked into judgment and come out transformed. Not because judgment had made them stronger, it hadn't, but because they'd refused to let it define them. They'd insisted on being seen as they truly were, and eventually the world had no choice but to see them that way. That was the power of living authentically. That was the strength of refusing to hide. That was what it meant to write your own destiny, instead of accepting the one others tried to force upon you. And as they grew old together, surrounded by family and success and the deep satisfaction of a life well lived, they never forgot where they'd started. Never forgot the courage it took to choose each other when everyone said they shouldn't. Because sometimes the bravest thing you can do is refuse to believe the lie. Sometimes the strongest act is choosing love when the world chooses judgment. Sometimes the only way to win is to live so fully, so truthfully, that the darkness simply can't survive in the light you create. That was their victory. That was their legacy. And it was enough.